So we're going to begin, and hopefully this will all work beautifully, and if it doesn't, then it won't. Alright, let's try this, all videos. Problem is it doesn't say that I'm live, which is a problem. The joys of technology. Alright, if you see me and you're on, if you can comment, it looks like someone's watching me, so that's at least a good start. Just comment here, Jerry, Betsy, if you're with us. And perfect. Alright, and I will text Jerry as well that I'm live. And perfect. So, okay, so we are going to begin. Today we are going to talk about a very simple concept. Not simple to implement, but simple to understand. And the concept is like this. What happens when you do something wrong? So if someone does something wrong, very often they convince themselves that there is no recourse. I can't make amends for anything that I've done. Especially when the thing that I did is really bad. When something that I did is not that bad, so I could say I'm sorry and move on. But what happens when you do something that's almost impossible to rectify? So you've done something wrong, and the realities are that you can't change some of the realities. For example, you kill someone. For example, your name is Bernie Madoff and you stole millions or billions or trillions of dollars, and there is no way to get that money back. The money's gone. So what do? Can you make amends? Is there hope for you? And there's different questions here. Is there hope for you personally? And is there hope for you for your victims? Is there hope for your victims? Is there hope for you? And is there atonement for your soul? Which are different facets of this. So let's look at the first case. The first case is, you'll see it in text 1 in lesson 4. The first case is a simple situation in which there was a cricket player. There were some people who were after a cricket game, and they got drunk at a pub. They got in a fight. He punched the other guy, and he killed him. The victim, James Hodgkinson. The perpetrator, Jacob Dunn. So is there any hope for Jacob Dunn? That's the question. Can he make amends? He killed the other guy. One punch, he fell, he hit his head, he died. Second story. Now if you look at the second story, we're not saying the person's name in the second story completely, and we'll discuss more about that next week. But in the second story, the perpetrator, was allegedly stole a lot of money. What she did is, she was the bookkeeper for a air conditioning company, and she would write checks to herself. Slow internet, stop and restart stream at 480p or 360p quality. Tap for more. Betsy, Jerry, is the quality okay? Or is the app making an issue, or is the quality okay? If it's okay, give a thumbs up. If I should restart it at a lower quality, thumbs down. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Looks good. You can hear me well as well. Perfect. If there's an issue, let me know. All right, so Stacy R. worked for this air conditioning company, and she slowly but surely wrote certain checks to herself claiming to reimburse herself for company expenses that she made in her private credit card. She wasn't authorized to make company expenses on her private credit card. And over the period of time from 2011 to 2014, she paid herself $140,000. So the charge is that the company paid for services that they did not receive. So the question becomes, can she make amends? Is there a difference between these two cases in making amends? Yeah.
The man that punched the other person was inebriated.
Correct.
I don't think he punched him to kill him. I think that the alcohol affected him. And some people, alcohol affects them just that way. They get angry, they do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. He did it. Unfortunately, he fell back hit his head and died. The woman intentionally, deceived her employer. And so that was intentional, and for him, even though he hit him, he didn't intend to kill him.
So what you're saying is that there's differences between the cases. Case number one was unintentional. The actual act was unintentional, although perhaps the action of drinking may have been intentional. And the second case, in which she intentionally embezzled money, or allegedly embezzled money, it's a different story. So one difference between the two is the result, but the other difference is the perpetrators. One was intentionally doing something, the other one was not intentionally doing something.
And she could pay the money back.
The flip side is, in the case of embezzlement, she could pay the money back. The person who inadvertently killed someone, the fact is the person's dead, he can't bring them back. So these two situations, ultimately, we have to juggle them. And you can think to yourself of another situation which you know the crime and think, can the person make amends? So to put things in perspective, Judaism has a belief about the term we're going to use is teshuvah. Teshuvah is generally translated as repentance. It means more than that. And we're going to talk not only about the technical legal aspects of teshuvah. The legal aspects of teshuvah mean one thing. Stop doing what you're doing wrong. Done. You've done teshuvah. The most basic level, according to the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he says, teshuvah is forsaking doing the sin. No longer doing the sin anymore. So what is it? So what is rehabilitation? So text number 3 says like this. Maimonides says like this. We're going to talk about the global teshuvah, not only the basic no longer doing the action. So the global teshuvah is like this. Teshuvah atones for all sins, even for people that were wicked their entire life. So who can do teshuvah? Everybody. Even people who were wicked their entire life. And even such a person, when could they do tshuva? And did tshuva at the last moment. So when could they do tshuva? Any time. Their wickedness is no longer held against them. This is the meaning of the verse. The wicked person will not stumble due to his wickedness on the day he does teshuvah for it. Which means that teshuvah can be accomplished for every action, all sins, wicked their entire life by all people, at any time, even at the last moment. Which clearly that means that teshuvah is not necessarily completely solving the core problem. Which means teshuvah is not necessarily actually rectifying the sin in the conventional sense of paying the money back, because the person's dead, they can't pay the money back. So teshuvah really means changing who you are. Teshuvah is when the perpetrator is no longer Does it have to be genuine? We'll get to that of how we can determine. But yes, it has to be genuine. Otherwise, it's not actually changing the person you are. So teshuvah, what it really means is it means the person who exists now is a different person. So it's not, I've created a fake facade as if I'm a new person, and I as a human being can't judge your teshuvah because I don't know if you're a new person. Teshuvah means the person who exists today is not the person who did that act. So sometimes when a child makes a mistake and you say, who did it? And they say, it wasn't me, and it was them. Perhaps what they really mean is, the person who did the act wasn't the real me. The real me didn't do it. It was a moment of folly. Right? So when we do something wrong, when we recognize that what we did wrong was not the right thing to do, what are we really doing? We're saying, that's not really me. The real me can the real you stand up? When you do that, that's teshuvah. There was a man named Shimon ben Lakish. I've mentioned him before, Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was a bandit. He and his two comrades would wander in the mountains and rob everyone who would cross their path. So in the second paragraph, text number 4, what did Rabbi Shimon do eventually? He left his two outlaw friends and returned to God wholeheartedly, fasting and praying earnestly. He would go to the synagogue every morning and evening and spent all his days studying Torah and giving charity to the poor. He never returned to his negative ways, and God accepted his repentance. He was a bandit, a highway robber, grand larceny, all the time. The Bernie Madoff of his day, maybe. Right? He did it a different way, but he was stealing money from people. Now, his inspiration for teshuvah was that he saw a woman bathing in the river. He found that it was a man, and he told the man how beautiful the man is. And the man says, you think I'm beautiful? You should meet my sister. So he said, and the man turned to him and said, with power like that, he jumped. He did an amazing feat of power to reach this woman that he thought was a woman. And he says, with power like that, you should be studying Torah. He says, with beauty like that, you should be a woman. So he said, meet my sister. He says, here's the deal. I'll introduce you to my sister on condition that you become a new person. So he became a new person. So he introduced him to his sister. Sure enough, he became his brother-in-law, and they would fight in the yeshiva study halls ever since they were, best brothers-in-law. And while they would disagree on many things, they ultimately were very close, to the extent that when one of them died, the other one couldn't be consoled because his best buddy was gone. But this means that a man who was a bandit changed his life. The man who left his two outlaw friends and returned to God wholeheartedly, fasting and praying and giving charity and doing acts of kindness and studying Torah, was not the same person who was the bandit. Even though they had the same body, and even though they did, hung out with people and they lived in the same community, it wasn't the same person. It was a new person who happened to be in the same body. Now, we would generally think, I don't like the word confessions on top on the screen, but we would generally think, let's just say, teshuvah is for everything and everyone I can handle, but any time. It's one thing if a guy never offends again. Right? So they did teshuvah, we now know they're a different person. But if they're on their deathbed, what's it worth? What's it worth? Hey, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Now that you have the money in the bank, now you're going to tell me about how I repent, I feel bad for what I did. Yeah, with friends like that, we don't need enemies. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, what's going on? But anyone can do teshuvah. Why? Because teshuvah recognizes that I'm really a human being and that I really have a godly soul and I really have the ability to be a different person. I could tap into my godly image. So true, I may never reoffend, but myself needs rehabilitation. My soul needs rehabilitation. So can I become a new person? At any time you can become a new person. You just have to, what's the first step in teshuvah? What's the first step in recovery, in any addiction?
Admitting that you have a problem.
Admitting to yourself that you have a problem. Saying, I've got a problem. So the first step in teshuvah is saying, I may not be able to do it again. I may not be able to get another drink, but I have a problem with drinking. I have a drinking problem. There's no alcohol in 1,000 miles. The first step is recognizing that you've got a drinking problem. The first step is recognizing that there are things that I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing, that are not in line with my true values. They're not in line with my godly soul. That's the first step. And then there's a process. Once a person recognizes that they've got a problem, even if they recognize this on their deathbed, so there's a process. And not all of this process can you do on your deathbed. But if a person has the ability to do the entire process, they should. And if they can't, they don't. What is this process? Text number 5. What constitutes teshuvah? Teshuvah is when transgressors abandon their transgressions, remove them from their thoughts, resolve in their heart never to commit them again. This is, and I'm going to skip the verses because they're just proofs, which is the style of the text. The next paragraph, returnees must also regret their past. The next paragraph, returnees must reach the level where God, who knows the hidden, will testify about them that they will never return to this sin again. And the last paragraph, they must also verbally confess their sins and state these matters which they resolved in their heart. So the first thing in teshuvah is stop doing it. Abandon the transgressions. You also have to regret what you did. You also have to reach a place where God would be able to testify at this moment that you will never do that again.
What was that to do with?
We're back. So, teshuvah consists of abandoning the sin, regretting it, getting to a place where you will never do such a thing again, verbally confessing that verbally saying that you regret it and will not do it again. So what that means, you're going to get in trouble from her, I don't know. What that means is not, let's be clear what it's not. It's not getting to relive the sin. You do not have to say every last detail of the action that you took. But on a general basis, you have to say, I stole, and I regret that I stole, and I won't do it again. I murdered, and I regret that I murdered, and I won't do it again. You don't have to say, I took the hammer, and I went to the person, and I broke their wall, and I made a hole in the wall, and the hole caused a flood because I hit a pipe, and I ruined their entire base. You don't have to go through all the details. You don't get to the enjoyment of reliving the sin. Now, some sins are not as enjoyable to the simple person as others, but when it's but some sins, it's actually enjoyable to repeat the story of when I did that sin. Let's talk about a kid who made trouble in class, and they say, "Oh, I feel so bad. Let me tell you what I did. Did I get that teacher well? I feel so bad." And they might even be genuine, but they do get enjoyment out of repeating all the details of how they got that teacher. So similarly, when confessing a sin, we do it similarly like we do in the confessional prayers of Yom Kippur, in which we give a synopsis. Forgive me for the sin of evil talk. We don't get to repeat all the evil talk that we said. Forgive me for the sin of gossip. We don't get to repeat all the gossip that we said, just as a general rule. So, resolve for the future, regret for the past. Now, does it have to be genuine? Absolutely. It's got to be genuine. But here's the problem. The problem is that human beings have a really hard time being genuinely remorseful. Because, think for a moment of something wrong that you've done in the past 90 days. Something you did wrong. Probably all of us did something, maybe very, very minor. Like I coveted someone else's, if you're a female, someone else's dress, and if you're a male, someone else's car. Right? Just very, very basic. Let's not get hectic sins. A very basic sin. Now, why did you covet that sin? Why did you do that coveting or whatever that sin was? And within about 4 seconds, you can probably come up with 15 reasons of why what you did wasn't so bad. It really wasn't so bad. You have to understand, I didn't actually take it from them. I didn't even talk to them about it. I didn't, all the reasons. Do you know what kind of upbringing I had? And I was just in an excited mood, so I was like, I had just looked that day at dresses and at cars. I give you all the reasons why, really, it wasn't so bad. But the truth is, you did what you did. Yes.
I do the opposite.
Yes.
I don't find excuses why I did something. I sort of beat myself up for why I did it. That's not the same, I don't think.
So it's the same. It's just the flip side of the same coin.
Oh, okay.
In which you don't take responsibility.
Yeah, I do.
You don't. You take responsibility by saying I'm a bad person.
No, I'm very specific.
Right?
I don't think I'm a bad person in general.
You say no, but you say, why did I do that sin? You beat yourself up. What does it mean? What does the word beat myself up mean?
Well, it's like, you shouldn't have done that. That person didn't deserve it.
Right? But what does that say about you? I don't want to hear about the other person.
Oh, at that moment, I was being selfish.
Okay. So get deeper about it.
Okay, I wasn't perfectly kind in how I said something because I
Why
was
not?
in a bad mood and angry at the person.
Okay, so what really caused it was that you were in a bad mood. Meaning, what we do...
The real issue was that the person had done the same thing over and over again.
No problem. So when we dig deep, and we're really, really honest with ourselves, we give ourselves excuses. Whether the excuse is I was angry, or the excuse is I was tired, or the excuse is I was hungry, or the excuse is that person deserved it.
But I guess maybe I'm too focused on the word excuse, because that means to me like I'm not taking responsibility.
Right, but and what I'm saying is sometimes we claim that we take responsibility, and we don't really take responsibility.
All right.
That's the claim. And we'll see it inside. Text number 6. The fact that people make excuses for their transgressions is a major problem. page 136, 37. The fact that people make excuses for their transgressions is a major problem. Our nature is such that when we do something good, we credit ourselves. When we do something wrong, we blame others. This is because of our self-love. By nature, we love ourselves, and this causes us to be in denial about our own transgressions.
Did a man write this?
We're not done. 1 second. And to fail to recognize that we are at fault for them. Even worse, this also causes us to make justifications for our negative actions. Although it is true that a negative environment and the wrong friends influence us greatly, the truth is we are to blame for this. Because we choose to associate ourselves with the wrong people and environment, we definitely can't only blame others for this and justify ourselves. Sometimes we blame our negative actions on our excitable temperament. We reason that because we get excited easily, we are impulsive and can't control ourselves from getting angry, speaking and thinking negative things and committing negative actions. The excuse of an excitable temperament is not a real excuse. Our temperament comes from our animalistic soul, but we are also given a godly soul that has the ability to overpower our animalistic soul. This is the very purpose of our creation, to use the power of our godly soul to overcome and subdue the inclinations of our animalistic soul. If our animalistic soul is coarse and easily excitable, our godly soul surely has stronger powers that give us the ability to overcome our natural inclinations. God does not make demands of us that are beyond our abilities. So what he's saying here is when we take responsibility, you have to take real responsibility. And the word excuse is, I like the word, mainly because of the Aramaic behind the word. The word for excuse in Aramaic is amasla. Amasla. And it's spelled in Hebrew, Aleph Mem Saf Lamed Aleph. Now if you take those letters in Hebrew and you split them after the third letter, you have Aleph Mem Saf, which is the same Hebrew word as emet, truth, and Lamed Aleph, which is the Hebrew word for no. So an excuse is usually not the truth. It doesn't mean it's not truth. It's not true. But that's not the truth. The reason why we do things wrong is not because of all the environmental things around us or in us that cause us to, I'm talking about a 100% healthy person. I'm not talking about a person this morning we had a whole discussion. It's not someone who has a mental illness. But a human being that is typically in their right mind, and they don't have a chemical imbalance, then they are responsible for the actions they take. And they can't blame their mother. No one's saying that their mother was perfect. But at this point in their life, at a certain point in your life, what your mother did is not, you still have to take responsibility for your actions. You might need therapy, but you still have to take responsibility. It's not what happened to you. I have a friend who's had a lot of trauma in his childhood. And at some point he started to take responsibility for some of his actions. And recovered a lot. Maybe not 100%. But don't use external things to not take responsibility and claim that I don't have to take responsibility. The first step in taking responsibility is accepting that the external forces did not force you to do things. A word that's in vogue today is personal accountability. And the third thing is you gotta verbally say it.
My bad.
Not to someone else. To yourself. You have to say to yourself, I really made a mistake. Like for real. You have to tell God, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that.
I have to tell you something that is so remarkable, and you know it because you and I saw this, and that was Shizzle. Remember?
Oh.
Where the rabbi tells his brother had left and gone to Turkey or something, right? And left his mother, he never visited his mother, never came home, didn't write, nothing.
He went to
Then
Amsterdam,
it was Amsterdam, okay. So anyways, he comes back because his mother's ill, she's almost dead, right? The first thing he does is figure out, well, what am I getting out of the deal? So anyway, so he wants to borrow, later on he wants to borrow money from his brother. And the rabbi says, you know what, I'll tell you, I'll lend it to you. He said, but first, I need you to get a piece of paper and I want you to write something down. I said, really? Okay. So he said, I want you to write, so what do you want me to write? I want you to write that I was a bad son and that, I never visited my mother. I didn't, ever do anything for her and abandoned her, whatever. And so then, first he won't do it, but then he needs the money and he concedes. He said, well, what are you gonna, so he finally writes it out and he hands to the rabbi and he said, I don't want it, that's for you. I thought that was such a wonderful lesson. I loved it.
So just to repeat for those who are watching,
I don't want it, that's
in the
for
TV
you.
series Shtisel, tell me if I repeat it right, because they said they couldn't hear your voice.
Oh, sorry.
So in the TV series Shtisel, there's a person who tries to borrow money, and he wasn't a good son, and the rabbi says, I'll lend you the money, you have to write, I wasn't a good son. And he doesn't want to write it, eventually he writes it, and then he gives it to the rabbi, so the rabbi will give him the money, and the rabbi says, it's not for me, it's for you. In which you have to confess to yourself, it's about living with your own decisions on your own. It's not about confessional to absolve you of what you did wrong, but it's the verbal confession is so that you've brought into the open the secret of the sin that you committed.
I agree with everything you just said, and that makes me not understand the idea of going to a confessional, telling somebody what you've done all week, and then being absolved. And
so Judaism doesn't believe in that, so
right.
we're good.
Yeah.
We're good.
No, I know, but that
I was getting nervous.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Because if you want to confess, there's down the block. I have a friend.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
No,
I'm kidding.
I wouldn't tell you, but
Yeah.
but I wouldn't. But that's not. But I wouldn't feel absolved. I would have just told somebody about it.
Right. So these are the three processes, the three parts. There's resolve not to reoffend, regret, and verbal confession. Now these three are in a situation where you offended God. No human beings involved. For example, you missed lighting Shabbos candles. You lit Shabbos candles, you committed to light Shabbos candles, and you didn't light Shabbos candles. You guys are both vegetarian, right?
What's that?
You're a vegetarian?
I'm a vegetarian now.
No. Okay.
Betsy, I think.
Betsy's also vegetarian. So, you ate a cheeseburger. You ate a cheeseburger, right? Even if you're not a vegetarian. If you eat a vegetarian, it's a double whammy. If you are a vegetarian. If you're not a vegetarian, it's still a problem because cheese, kosher cheese and kosher meat, eating them together, it's a sin. So now, so you didn't hurt any human beings. You didn't steal any money, you just ate a cheeseburger. So in that situation, you got to resolve not to do it, you got to regret that you did it, and you got to admit that you did it. And verbally say, I'm not going to do it again. Simple process. We all understand this in this type of situation. We could even understand how someone could do that on their deathbed. Not going to do it again. I regret that I did it. And say it verbally. If you're able to talk on your deathbed, you can say it verbally, everyone's happy, right? Good. But what happens when there's a human being involved? I stole money. So what are the added steps if you steal money? So there's two added steps. One added step is you got to make financial restitution. Financial restitution. Even if you killed someone, you have to make financial restitution, especially if it's the breadwinner. You got to be the life insurance policy. Even if it was inadvertent. You have to ensure that the money is there for the family so that the family can live now that their breadwinner's gone. If you steal money, you got to repay the money. And according to some opinions, you got to repay the money that they would have made had they not had this money stolen from them.
So according to Jewish thought, then if you kill someone who's a breadwinner, you need to take care of the family?
Absolutely. Because that's restitution. I mean, next time you want to kill someone, I mean, just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. It might not be a financially sound idea.
For every transgression against a person, isn't that the same as transgressing against God?
Yeah, but we're talking about the human side. Meaning,
Okay.
if you might have to do 1, 2, and 3, but there's additional pieces. Number 2 is you have to ask the offended for forgiveness and appease them. So, how do you do this process? So let's talk text 7. Interpersonal sins, such as causing physical injury, cursing, or stealing, are never forgiven until the offender pays the necessary restitution and appeases the victim. Even after repaying restitution to the victim, the offender must appease the victim and ask for forgiveness. Even for verbal abuse that did not cause any tangible loss, the offender must appease the victim and seek forgiveness until it is granted. Now, Jerry asks, how do we figure out that number?
What number?
How much money you have to give them? If you stole money,
Sounds like Jerry.
if you stole money, you stole money. But if you didn't steal money, you killed someone, how do you figure out that number? And the answer is, you don't. You work with the family to figure out the number. There's no list. This is how much people make, this is how much it's. You work with the family to figure out what is a number that would help them be able to live.
Have you ever known this to be done? Like, for example, somebody accidentally has a car accident and they accidentally run somebody over and is the breadwinner. Have you ever seen this where they go back to the family and say that?
So in the current legal system, they don't operate that way, but they operate a different way. You sue for damages, and you get $1 million or $10 million, and it happens through a different process. But in the Jewish way, that's the goal. The goal of the money is not just, hey, I can squeeze money out of the insurance company or out of the person. The goal of the money is to provide for the loss, the financial loss of this person. Now,
but in rabbinical times, weren't there, they did have a list, so to speak. If they, maybe not for death, but for if you put out somebody's eye, maybe even for death, actually.
So the way it worked in such a situation, there were fines for specific things, which included 5 bills. There was the bill for the embarrassment you caused them, which depends on the person's stature. If you offend me, it's different than if you offend someone who is a clown. Because a clown expects to be made fun of. If you go over to me and you beat my nose, that's, in public. It's different than if you go over to the clown and beat their nose. Right? We both might be embarrassed, but he's going to be less embarrassed than me, because he sort of expects it. So there's that. There's different payments. There's the payment. So for the physical damage, they did have, what is the cost of idleness? So for example, if you would be hired, your disability would take X amount of money away from your pay. You wouldn't be able to get certain jobs because you're missing one eye, so you can't be an airplane pilot, let's say, in the Israeli Air Force. So that causes X amount of money. So they had a standard day rate, and how much you would lose off that day rate was the restitution. And appeasement is, you have to really do your best to get the person to forgive you. On the most basic level. Like, it's called forgiveness. I mean, on the most basic level, you need to beg for forgiveness. Only afterwards is confession worth anything. You want to confess to God all you want, that's great. But that's a waste of time. Telling God how much you feel bad for something when that person is still suffering, that's not restitution. It might make you feel good, but it doesn't change the facts. You rework on your relationship with God after working on your relationship with the human being. So the step when it's interpersonal transgressions is resolve not to do it again, regret doing it. Verbal confession goes to the end. Restitution, appeasement, and only then verbal confession. Now, that's all good intellectually. But think about it in, I think, the halls of recovery, right? Any type of addiction in the recovery rooms, there's a process of recovery. And part of that process is these pieces. Recognizing what you did, making amends, restitution if at all possible. But more than that, the goal of recovery is to recognize that the person who did the act of addiction, while we still have to be careful about that person coming back into me, but that person really is gone. And therefore, the best person to talk to a current addict is someone who's in recovery. Because they actually understand addiction and actually understand recovery. The best person who can deal with someone who's depressed is someone who was depressed and worked their way through that process. The best person to talk to someone, God forbid, who has a sickness is a survivor of that sickness. People sometimes come to me for advice. I'm the rabbi, right? Rabbis are supposed to know everything. And sometimes I'll tell them, I can't relate. I'll be supportive, but if we're going to be honest here, I can't relate to what you're going through. As much as I want to relate, I can't relate. Because the realities are, I've never been there. So when someone does go through this process, they are above someone who never had that process. Because this new person is someone who overcame a struggle. They built that muscle. No one wants to struggle, but God values when we win a struggle. And when we win a struggle, we are stronger afterwards. We've built a muscle to be stronger. And at that point, the returnee is on a higher spiritual level than the person who never committed a sin. Why? If you think about it in when people work out, a person who was always fit has less fat to turn into muscle. But someone who was not always fit, that fat could then be turned into muscle, so they could become stronger. Now, there are methods that you can do is you put in it's basically artificial fat. You add fat to yourself, or maybe it's proteins or other things that you put into yourself to convert into fat. So if a person wants to build muscle and they're not naturally they don't have that much fat to turn into muscle, so they feed themselves fattening things so that they have fat that they can then convert into muscle. It may not ever become fat, because as soon as they get it, they right away start working on converting it into muscle. But a person who does something wrong, what they're doing is they're converting the sin into a stronger muscle of willpower, of being able to do the right thing. Now, so they're not only are they do they overcome the struggle, they're stronger for it. But even more than that. Since they're a new person, they now have to live as that new person. If they're on their deathbed, it's a different story. But let's say a person does become a new person. They need to change themselves. Now, what's the source of all sin? Of all sin. The source of all sin is ego.
I was just about to say ego.
Is ego.
Yes.
The source of all sin is ego. Now, what ego is not I am worthless, is not I am amazing and everyone else is worthless. Ego is everyone else is worth, but I'm worth more. And humility is not I'm nothing. Humility is I'm great. And if someone else would have the environment and the abilities and talents that I was given, they would possibly be greater. Or, as they say in recovery, ego is edging God out, and not humility doesn't mean to think less of yourself. It means to think about yourself less. So, a tshuva lifestyle means I'm not greater than anyone else. I'm not more deserving than anyone else. I'm blessed that I have what I have. So there goes all jealousy. Because if you're thankful for what you have, you don't have to be jealous of anyone else. And this isn't only financial. It could be in everything. We're jealous of people because they have a better family life. They have a better relationships. They have a better upbringing. They have a better schooling. I mean, you can go on. Things that we're jealous. And sometimes it's more overt. Sometimes it's less overt. Sometimes it's just we get frustrated at someone because they're more organized than us. Which means I'm supposed to be organized like them. You're not. You're supposed to be you. I'm lucky that I'm able to be as organized as I am. If we recognize that we're not, that what we do have is good, and that's good, and we're not better than someone, we don't deserve what other people have. Thank God my oldest two are different. They're different temperaments, they're different types of people. And we continuously try to encourage them to understand you're not the same. You don't have to be each other. If you'll be the best Henya and you'll be the best Rachalea, everyone will be just fine. But if Rachalea starts being Henya and Henya starts being Rachalea, that's going to be a problem. And what do you mean? She's more musical than me. She's a better artist than me. So, who told you that you deserve to be a better artist? You have your talents, she has her talents. Now, it's funny when it's kids, but we all do this as adults. Sometimes we do it more clearly, and sometimes we convince ourselves, no, it's not. That wasn't really what was going on. So the process of teshuvah is a lifelong experience. As it says in text 9, amongst the paths of repentance is for returnees to constantly call out before God, crying and entreating to perform charity, crying and entreating, prayer, Number 2, to perform charity to the best of their ability. 3, to greatly distance themselves from the object of their sin. 4, to change their name, as if to say, I am a different person and not the one who sinned. 5, to positively change all of their behavior to the path of righteousness. 6, to travel in exile from their home. 7, or 6 explained. Exile atones for sin because it causes people to humble themselves and be meek of spirit. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do all these things. But what it's saying is, what Maimonides is saying, first of all, this lifestyle of those days, some of these things made more sense. But the goal is to change who you are. Change your name. Doesn't mean you have to change your name legally. But try this. Next time you meet someone and they ask you your name, say Mrs. and your last name. Just that. Or doctor and your last name. Just that. Don't do anything else. What are you doing when you do that? You are creating a framework for who you are. How do people refer to you? When I moved to town, right away, what's your name? Cushy. That's my name, right? As time moved on, it became Rabbi Schusterman, and eventually it became Rabbi Cushy. Or Rabbi Schusterman, or whatever you want. But I added the rabbi because it forces me to act in a position of who I am. Now, I didn't become that much of a greater person by moving to Harford County, but it forced me to act in a way with this new name. So, my understanding of the new name is that. So, let's repeat. Prayer, which we're going to explain more in the May course, but prayer, what prayer really means is to change, to recognize the greatness of God and how significant and insignificant simultaneously we are in front of God. We are the most important, and we shouldn't feel that important, which is, it's a lot more complex than that, but that's the core concept. Prayer, in proper prayer, means, God, you are great, so compared to you, I'm insignificant. But at the same time, you have made me great and given me the opportunity to be connected with greatness. So it's a very humble greatness. The second thing is charity, which means giving of things that I worked for, or my body. Volunteering is also charity. Giving of myself. Distance yourself from the object of sin. If you hang out with your triggers, chances are you're going to be triggered. I mean, that's just the way it works. If you hang out with the object of your sin, if you're a kleptomaniac, stay away from money. I mean, it's not that's not rocket science, that one. Change who you are, change your name, change how you see yourself. A name ultimately is the way how people view themselves and how others view them. So change who you are, meaning change how you view yourself. I'm not Cushy the sinner. I'm Cushy the penitent. Just that. And I'm not saying necessarily change your name for other people. Right? It's a if you remember Charlie, right? Charlie used to come sometimes for to classes and services, right? So Charlie today goes by his Hebrew name, which I don't remember off the top of my head what it is. Right? So, but he's a new person. Now he actually went through a conversion, so he's halachically he's a new human being, but he's a new person and he goes by his Jewish name. If you meet him, we'll tell you what his name. Aryeh Shmaya. His name's Aryeh Murray, not Charlie anymore. No problem. So change who you are and get yourself uncomfortable. That's what exile really means. When I'm comfortable in the world I created for myself, it's very hard to change. Change comes when you get yourself uncomfortable from the world that you were. So again, it doesn't mean you need to move houses necessarily, but you have to be willing to be comfortable in the new house that you're in. Even if you're in the same walls, but you're in a new place. That's what I think exile ultimately means, especially in the modern day. And then the last thing is the last step in the 12 steps is help other people go through this process as well. And I caution very, very strongly. I caution very strongly this last one. So text 10, he says like this. The final thing every attorney should do is inspire others to do teshuvah by teaching and instructing them to follow the correct path. The attorney should caution people and inform them of the negative consequences of transgression, the reward for following the correct path, and how God accepts returnees. This is what the King David said when he prayed to God about his sin. I will teach your transgressors your ways, so that they will return to you. This is, I can't stress this enough. This does not mean to become an evangelist. I found God, let me introduce you to the God that I found. And let me warn you, if not, it's purgatory. Forever. Eternal damnation. Are you ready? Come. Let me come to shul. Come on. Let me tell you what. This is the best thing since sliced bread. It's even better than sliced bread. Let me tell you about it. Not the way to go. But isn't that what he's saying? So I think what he's saying, my understanding is, and I've said this to people privately in the past. Let's talk about a man who's married. And he starts going to synagogue every Shabbos. And he gets up early, 8 o'clock in the morning. His wife stays home with the kids. And he goes to shul. He gets home 1:30 in the afternoon. He says, was that prayer great? Let me tell you how great that prayer was. Inspirational. It's Shabbos afternoon. I'm going to go take a nap. How are the kids? They were good. Oh, they drove you crazy? Oh, great. I'm going to go take a nap. And then he goes, takes a nap. He wakes up. He says, isn't Shabbos beautiful? Does that inspire his wife anything about Shabbos? No. Now imagine that same person comes home and he says, it was really, really nice and shul. Why don't you go take a nap? Why don't you go take a nap? I spent some time with God. I should probably spend some time with the kids. Will that inspire his wife to be happy? I'm not even talking about her going to shul. To be happy that he goes to shul. That'll be. Now, don't get me wrong. I take naps Shabbos afternoon. Right? There's no secret about that. But I'm not trying to inspire Freda about anything. She's the inspired one. I just do some of the work. But I'm saying, and in every relationship there's a lot of different nuances, but the core concept is, if going through this process changes you to be a better person, and you communicate to people that the reason I'm a better person is because I went through this process, by nature you're inspiring them to explore this process. As opposed to preaching to them. So he's saying inspire. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's the same thing. Don't go to your alcoholic friend who's in the middle of a drink and try to convince him to come to AA. Because it's not going to work. But if you manage to get your addiction under control to the extent that you yourself have recognized and gone through some of the steps, that person, you can tell that person, you can say, is your life unmanageable? Because if that's the problem, I know a way to help. Have you hit rock bottom? Let me tell you what I went through. Because I hit rock bottom. I was arrested. I woke up, on my front lawn. Everyone has their own rock bottom. So I hit rock bottom, which inspired me to go to AA. Now you might want to do the same. And it's whether it's AA or whether it's embezzlement whether it's murder, whether it's religious stuff. A person who goes through the process and it makes their life different, and people see that process, we don't have to explain to them what process they should be going through. What we can do is we can inspire them by acting in the right way. Now, taking what we know into account, we then have to ask ourselves, how do we apply these to the cases of murder? So let me introduce you to a case of murder. Nissen and Simcha got into a fight. They got into a fight. Simcha had a friend, Nachman. Nachman and Simcha together killed Nissen. Simcha felt bad. And Nachman said, he deserved it. Simcha was drunk at the time, or inebriated to some extent. Now, to someone who relies on the communal structure to be part of a community, who's unremorseful, what we do is, or what we used to do in Jewish tradition was, we excommunicate them, which means you can't do business with them. You can't count them for the minyan. You can't include them in communal functions because they're a person who's not a mensch. So we remove their communal support, which forces them to hopefully become remorseful. Now, once they become remorseful, we don't force them to do a certain process, but we encourage them to do a certain process. And this process, which we're going to read in text 11, will definitely shake your sensibilities, but it was a process that the person accepted upon themselves. And what I could not get data on is whether, when the person asked for a public flogging from the person leading the services, did he get it? Or did the guy give him a flogging, but one that was just more of a, as if, right? So that he can fulfill his requirement, but not actually get any pain inflicted. And I don't know what actually happened. It's very hard to find out what happened in the shtetl. But this is the letter of the move of repentance for Simcha.
How do you give a symbolic flogging? Just wondering.
It's very simple. I mean, I do it every Erev Yom Kippur. You take off a belt, and you go like this. You hit them. But there's a hit, and there's a hit. You know the difference between the two? And then there's one that you're hitting and one that you're hitting. There's one that you do it on their shirt and the other one that you do it flat on their back. I mean, there's one with a thin strap and one with a thick strap. I mean, they're very different, and it all is flogging, but there's a big difference in the experience, to put it mildly. So I will now detail text 11. I will now detail the tshuva process for Simcha based on what I have understood from earlier sources. However, I do not know this man and his character, so if the scholars of Punzan see fit to make changes to the process, they may do so. This is the process of tshuva for him. He should go out into exile and travel for a full year. He should attend the local synagogue every day, or at least on Mondays and Thursdays, and pray wearing 3 iron shackles, one on each of his hands, which he committed the crime, and one on his body. In the evening, he should come to the synagogue barefoot, and the leader of the services should give him lashes in public before the prayers. He should announce to the assembled, "Know, my masters, that I am a murderer because I intentionally killed Nissen. This is my process of atonement. Please pray for divine mercy for me." He should fast every day for an entire year, except on festive days. He should not eat meat, drink wine, or become intoxicated. He should abstain completely from the particular alcoholic beverage that he was intoxicated from when he committed the terrible act. He should not sleep with a pillow or a cushion, except on Shabbat and Jewish holidays. During the entire period of exile, he should not cut his hair or beard, because refraining from this is a practice associated with teshuvah. He should not bathe with hot water during the week and before Shabbat, except for the day preceding a festival. He should only wash his head once a month, and only wash his clothes once in a while. He should not visit taverns, because this is where he started to act wrongly. He should not play any gambling games at all, because this led to the murder. If people malign him and call him a murderer, he should remain silent. It doesn't give them permission to do it, but if they do it, he should accept it lovingly, and lovingly accept the embarrassment and say, this is an atonement for me. He should be particular about reciting the Shema and daily prayers, and recite a special confessional prayer 3 times a day. After the confession, he should say, please God, accept my teshuvah, because I have transgressed and spilled innocent blood. May my suffering and embarrassment atone for me. After the end of this year, he should fast every Monday and Thursday for another entire year. For the rest of his life, he should be particular to commemorate the month and day on which he committed the murder. During this period of time, he should fast for 3 consecutive days if he is healthy enough. If he is weak, he can suffice with fasting for 2 days, the day on which the attack occurred and the day on which Nissen died. For the rest of his life, he should occupy himself with redeeming captives, acts of charity, and saving lives as a substitute for the life he took. He should reach a financial settlement with Nissen's heirs that will take care of their needs properly, and ask for forgiveness from the orphans and widow. He should return to God, and he will have mercy on him. Yisrael of Bruna. What's the goal of this process? Recognize what you did, choose to humiliate yourself, and recognize what you did. You took a life. That's no small thing. And change the person that you are. And never forget the person that you killed. And make sure the family's taken care of. Punitive. Exile, lashes, embarrassment. We don't do what they used to do, in which the community inflicts the punitive measures. He had to go to synagogue and say what he needed to say. There was no parole officer. If you want atonement, this is what you need to do. You need to punish yourself for having been a person who even allowed themselves to do such a thing. You're not allowed to mock people, but if they mock you, because people are still people, just accept it. Go fast, pray, go through your own process of spiritual reconnection. Change who you are. Stop drinking alcohol. Stop eating meat. No, don't stop enjoying life. And that alcoholic beverage that you drink, that's off limits forever. Forever. Over. History. Ultimately, it's no gambling. Include a reparative element, which is you got to help the family because you took away their breadwinner. A rabbi was I'm going to answer the question. The question that was asked was, how can you fast every day? Because you fast by day and you eat by night. A rabbi was driving on a train, but he wasn't dressed like a rabbi. He was dressed like a pauper. I think it was the Chafetz Chaim, but I might be wrong. Anyway, he arrived. He was on the train, and there was this other Jewish guy there, and he was like, "Oh, where are you going? What are you doing? Who do you think you are? You're sitting so comfortably. You're not sitting comfortably. You're dressed in rags. How are you dressed in rags?" He picked on him a little bit on the train. So they get to the train station, and the crowd's waiting to meet the rabbi. So the rabbi goes to his compartment. He puts on his hat. He puts on his coat, and he walks out. So this guy realizes, I messed with the rabbi. So the next day, he comes to the rabbi and he begs for forgiveness. So the rabbi said, "You didn't offend me. You offended the simple Jew who was sitting on the train. I'm not that guy. Go to a simple Jew and ask for forgiveness." So only the family can forgive their pain. I as the rabbi, I can't give atonement to this guy. He has to work it out with the family. When you hurt someone, you have to recognize who you hurt and get forgiveness from the people that you hurt. He didn't ask them to forgive the murder. He asked them to forgive the pain that that resulted to them from the murder. They can't forgive the murder. The dead man can forgive the murder. Not them. But they can forgive the pain that it caused them. And memorialize it. Memorialize the person. Always remember, I've done this egregious act. Can't bring him back. But twice a year, you gotta fast. Memorialize this person who's passed on. So if we go back to Jacob Dunn, our original case study of the guy who killed this guy in the pub, what would be his punishment? Punitive, spiritual, lifestyle, reparative, and memorialization. Same story. Not much would change. Now, would he have to wear shackles? Not necessarily. The culture wouldn't help him recognize where he's at in our current culture. But he maybe should tell people that, wear a button memorializing this person. Why are you wearing the button for that guy who killed in a pub? Because I killed him. That's why. I'm the person who killed him. It's very embarrassing. It's worse than shackles in the modern age. Post on Facebook, whatever. Meaning, memorialize however you memorialize. But for yourself, so that people will know and people will say, oh, you're the guy? Oh, that was you? You're the guy? Right. It's a different reality. Theft is a different problem. Text number 12. To atone for the transgression of theft, thieves must return what they stole in full, ask for forgiveness from the victim, receive punishment for the transgression, fast and confess to God. Returnees from theft should also be careful not to hold monetary deposits for others or deal with a fellow's money. Theft is tempting by nature, so they should distance themselves from other people's money. They should perform charitable acts with their person as well as with their money beyond their means. If you've got a money problem, don't deal with money. And again, punitive, spiritual, lifestyle, reparative, and memorialization. Now, memorialization, obviously, if you didn't kill someone, you're not going to memorialize them. But you could memorialize that act. Recognize what you did and recognize that you need to be a new person. And maybe have a day, one day a year, in which you go for, training in anti-kleptomania training or whatever. I don't know what it would be called. But I'm saying, deal with the realities of what you're dealing with. Punishment for the transgression may be community service, a certain amount of hours, pay full restitution, and maybe even pay, what the money would have made. Have a barometer that you work out with the family, with the people you hurt. If we would have had that, we would have bought another machine, or we would have hired another person, and therefore we would have been able to make another $50,000. Okay, maybe pay them the $190 instead of the $140 or whatever it was, or 40. I don't remember. I think it was $140. Ask for forgiveness. Beg for forgiveness. Deal with your own issues. Go through your own teshuvah process. And if you have a social circle in which you can be an example to others to not do these types of things, share your story. As painful as it might be, share your story. So, I'm going to skip the video that's going to show, but the video basically talks about the alternative sentencing in the modern justice system. And the current justice system, they basically throw people into jail or they give them punishments that don't necessarily help. But the Aleph Institute, as well as one of the people in our morning class, has worked to help people go through a process of rehabilitation. Whether it's murderers who they got out of jail, over 200 people out of jail, not Aleph, but this guy I spoke to this morning in the morning class, he got 200 people out of jail. And of the 200 people, 2 of them have returned to jail. Now they follow up with them. He helped start this program. They follow up with them. They work with them. They make sure that they're on the straight and narrow. They help them get jobs. It's a whole process. But judges need to sign off on some of these stuff. So with the Aleph also, sometimes it's community service. Sometimes it's a person who stole money because of greed. Their sentence is that they have to volunteer in a soup kitchen because they stole from people who need the money and recognize that, yeah, schlepping potatoes up from the basement of the soup kitchen is what you didn't recognize what your theft really was doing. Now, so there's different potential alternative sentencing, and Aleph works with sometimes, again, there's limitations. It has to be a nonviolent offense, it has to be certain things, but sometimes, and according to the law, while there's federal guidelines, they're only guidelines, they're not mandatory sentencing, even though a lot of times people see it that way. And we like to make it seem like it's so simple. There's a lot of repercussions to that. So if you give them an alternative sentence in which they get to go to college and get a degree, someone else might say, maybe I'll steal too so I can go to college for free on the taxpayer's dime, right? So you got to be careful of the unintended consequences of such actions. But the alternative sentencing would only work for the simchas of the world, those who are remorseful, not a threat to public safety, and genuinely wish to reform. It's very hard to get a good grip on these 3 things. I would encourage the judges to do their best. Are they really not a threat to public safety? Are they really remorseful? Do they really want to wish reform? Or are they remorseful, or are they remorseful that they got caught? What's the real remorse going on? So there's no easy answer on that one.
You often have the judges in teen court ask that exact question.
Yeah, do you feel bad, or do you feel bad that you got caught?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, if they feel bad that it got caught, they don't answer. Or sometimes they will put on the show. But, the judges have seen this all before, and even the teen juries, they can get the lay of the law.
So in teen court they ask this question, and the juries are teens also, so they sort of have a better grasp of whether you really feel bad, or you feel bad that you feel bad, or you feel bad that you don't feel bad, but if you got caught again, then it's going to be really bad, so then you say that you feel bad, and they pick up the nuances. But we shouldn't give up on unremorseful criminals. We should try to get them to a place that they can get in touch with their souls and become remorseful. Now, parole, ideally, should include a teshuvah program. Again, it's not simple to implement all these things as simply as we make it sound. It's not as black and white as we make it sound in the class, but the concept is there. And I encourage people to do this in their own life. When someone has committed a crime against you, not necessarily major, sometimes it's minor, give them a path, an alternative sentencing path, so that they can be remorseful. they're not a threat and they're remorseful, help them go through that process. Let them make amends. Don't hold that grudge forever. It may not change the past, but it could change them. And with that, we'll watch a video from our perpetrator in text number 1. Yeah, there you go. Hopefully. Maybe not. Maybe. Media unavailable. Guess we were not going to watch that video. See what happens.
Possibly getting ready, what's it called, booting up?
Buffering.
Buffer.
Oh, there you go. There it goes, just like that. All it needed is you.
James Hodgkinson, a 28-year-old trainee paramedic, went out with friends to a local pub after attending a cricket match in Nottingham, England, in July 2011. At the pub, an argument broke out between Hodgkinson and the heavily drunk Jacob Dunn, 19. Dunn struck Hodgkinson with a single punch, causing him to fall back and hit his head on the pavement. Hodgkinson suffered a fractured skull.
Oops. I fractured.
At the pub, an argument broke out between Hodgkinson and the heavily drunk Jacob Dunn, 19.
Let's try this one more time.
James Hodgkinson, a 28-year-old trainee paramedic, went out with friends to a local pub after attending a cricket match in Nottingham, England, in July 2011. At the pub, an argument broke out between Hodgkinson and the heavily drunk Jacob Dunn, 19. Dunn struck Hodgkinson with a single punch, causing him to fall back and hit his head on the pavement. Hodgkinson suffered a fractured skull and brain hemorrhage and died of his injury 9 days later. Jacob Dunn was tried for manslaughter and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. After 14 months of prison, Jacob was released on probation, but he had nowhere to go. His family had fallen apart and blamed him, and he blamed everyone but himself. He was homeless, jobless, unwanted, and hopeless. But all that changed with a simple question.
And then, a couple of months later, after getting out of custody and being a completely, no two ways about it, horrible person, my probation officer came to me and said, "Jacob, have you ever heard of restorative justice?" And I was just like, "No, what is it?"
Restorative justice is a program that seeks to mediate between victims and offenders to the advantage of all parties and society at large. The aim is for offenders to discover the harm they caused, learn to take responsibility for their actions, and change their ways. Victims play an active role in the process and seek answers to their burning questions, closure, and healing. For the first time, Jacob realized that he was not the victim.
Up until then, I'd never even thought about the parents. They said they had a few questions to ask me, and I said that, well, my thought process was that the least that I can do in this situation is answer some of these questions that they have,
As he learned of the depth of grief and loss he had inflicted, he experienced guilt and shame, emotions he had been trained to repel until then.
Started to tell me a lot more about what they went through. So they told me about what it was like sitting by their son on life support. They told me about what his funeral was like. I knew that I couldn't carry on going on the way that I was. But then after that, they started to ask me, but what are you doing with your life now? And that's what kind of took me back. I was like, how can they be interested in what I'm doing with my life? Do you know what I mean? And that just impacted me so much that it just spurred me on to think, like, okay, so what am I going to do with my life now to move forward in a positive way?
Jacob thanked them for saving his life by guiding him from the abyss along a path of transformation to a productive life. On their part, James's parents were deeply comforted by receiving a personal and sincere apology and truthful answers to their agonizing questions. Seeing Jacob work hard to turn his life around was also a source of comfort.
I mean, I just see him as a young lad that hit James, and it's a man that's sat next to me. You know, he's grown up, he's done so much in those last 2 or 3 years, and he's had to. If I can help him change things, and if we can get this message across, we can change it for other people.
Jacob and his victim's mother now share podiums to bring greater awareness of the dangers posed by the negative attitudes that caused the tragedy of James's death. They teach responsibility and share an uplifting message of transformation from despair to repair.
Just to be on camera. So next week we'll discuss the criminal background check. So today when you want to apply for a job, you need a criminal background check. Now what happens if your job is, let's imagine that you were in Jupiter, Florida, and you came recently from Asia, and you worked in a massage parlor, and you were forced to do things. You were charged with a felony. And then you want to volunteer at your children's school, or at a school in general. They say, sure, no problem, you can volunteer. Can you just fill out this form in which we'll do a criminal background check? Which says that 15 years ago, you were charged with prostitution. Is that fair? You can't sell cookies at the bake sale because you were charged with prostitution, which was out of your control? What about grand larceny? You stole a lot of money. You can't get a job installing kitchen counters? What happens if you were charged with involuntary manslaughter? You should lose your job as a bus driver? Or as a accountant? What do you mean? We have a right to know. What does the Torah say? Do you really have a right to know? You ever heard about some things are allowed to be private? Not all your mistakes. You don't want your mistakes publicized, especially if they're irrelevant. So that'll be the general discussion next week. And you'll notice in text number 2, we didn't say the person's full name. How could we? She wasn't convicted of a crime. In text 1, we did say his full name. Not only was he convicted of a crime, but he's public about it. He's like our friend Nissan, not Nissan, Nissan's dead. Our friend who murdered Nissan and was remorseful. who's now going to Shul saying, I'm a murderer. Simcha. Him we can say his name, but even in this text it doesn't say his last name. We don't know who Simcha was. But in this situation where he's open about what he's done and restorative justice, where it's okay for us to repeat it. But otherwise it's not okay. That concludes today's class. God willing, we'll see you next week. I'm gonna turn off the online recording. Hi Sandy, see you next week.